If you're running your own clinic, you already know. You're on the front lines, and you're seeing patients come in asking about therapies that were, well, they were never in your textbooks. We're talking psychedelics, shamanic practices, even energy healing. And look, this isn't just some clinical curiosity anymore. This is a massive business shift happening right under our feet. So the real question is, how do you adapt without putting everything you've worked so hard to build at risk? This is your survival guide.
So let's just start with the bottom line, shall we? $14 billion. That's what Americans are spending out of their own pockets on therapies just like these every single year. This is not a niche market. It's a full-blown, patient-driven economy, and it's happening right outside your clinic walls. The question really isn't if your patients are interested, it's how you can safely and sustainably bring a piece of this market into your own practice.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't some fringe observation. This quote comes from a report cited by the Institute of Medicine. So the medical establishment itself recognizes this as a tidal wave. Patients are voting with their wallets. And for a small practice, ignoring this, well, it means you're leaving a huge clinical and financial opportunity right there on the table.
So here's the crucial point, right? Bringing these therapies into your clinic goes way beyond just learning a new procedure. It forces you to completely reevaluate your business model, from your legal structure and your insurance policies to how you bill for your time and how you document patient care. If you get it right, you could be at the very forefront of a new era in healthcare. But if you get it wrong, you could put your entire practice at risk.
Okay, so before we can even really talk about the business model, we have to tackle the biggest hurdle first, that incredibly complex web of legal and financial risk. This is where even the most well-intentioned clinics can really stumble. So let's break it all down.
At the very heart of the risk for psychedelic therapies like MDMA and psilocybin is this definition right here. You see, as long as they remain Schedule I substances at the federal level, they are, by definition, illegal outside of very specific approved research. And that single classification creates this massive ripple effect that directly impacts your insurance, your liability, and your fundamental ability to operate. And that leads directly to this, the real-world consequences for your practice. Your standard malpractice policy, it almost certainly has something called an illegality exclusion. What that means is if a claim is tied to an activity that's illegal under federal law, your insurer can just deny coverage. Poof! Your general liability might not be enough to cover a severe adverse reaction, and believe it or not, even your property insurance could be at risk. It's a minefield out there.
All right, let's widen the lens a bit beyond psychedelics. What about things like shamanic or energy healing? This slide asks the one question your state licensing board will ask. Is facilitating a shamanic journey or performing Reiki considered the practice of medicine under your license? Some boards might just argue that it falls way outside your recognized scope, and that creates a major vulnerability for your license, especially if a patient files a complaint.
Okay, so let's assume for a minute you've navigated all those legal risks. The next giant hurdle is, of course, getting paid. This is the operational reality that determines whether offering these therapies is a viable business or just a very, very expensive hobby. So this really shows the two different worlds you'll be operating in. On one side, you have the familiar system, CPT codes, insurance reimbursement, it all makes sense. But on the other side, it's a cash-based world. You're dealing with things like super bills, which are basically just detailed receipts that patients have to submit to their own insurance, with absolutely no guarantee of coverage. This requires a totally different workflow for you and your staff.
But here is the first real glimmer of hope for some standardization. In early 2024, the American Medical Association introduced these new Category 3 CPT codes, and they're specifically for psychedelic-assisted therapy. As you can see, they're designed to capture the different phases of the treatment, from the prep and integration sessions all the way to the medication session itself. This is the essential first step toward building a real billing infrastructure.
And here is the critical fine print. Please hear this. These are temporary tracking codes. Their entire purpose is to allow researchers and providers and payers like Medicare to collect data on how these services are being used. They do not guarantee reimbursement. Not yet. Think of it like this. We're building the railroad tracks right now, but the train, full of money, it can't run on them just yet.
So, when does that train finally arrive? Well, this timeline, which is based on expert analysis, gives us a pretty good roadmap. The huge catalyst is the expected FDA approval of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, likely in 2025. Right after that, you'll probably see CMS launch pilot programs in 2026, which is a big deal, because commercial insurers almost always follow Medicare's lead. So widespread commercial adoption will likely start to phase in around 2027. It's not immediate, but you can see it on the horizon.
With that future timeline in mind, what can you do right now to protect your clinic? Well, your absolute best defense is a proactive one, and it's built on two things: solid internal policies and crystal clear patient consent.
No, really, I want you to actually think about this. For these new kinds of therapies, your standard one-page consent form is nowhere near enough. It needs to be a comprehensive document that truly educates the patient, sets very clear expectations, and of course, protects you legally.
These are the 4 non-negotiable pillars of a solid consent process. You have to detail the clinical risks and the financial reality. Be painfully clear about your fees and exactly what insurance will not cover. Reaffirm your privacy policies, and critically include legal disclaimers and seriously consider an arbitration clause, which is an agreement to handle any disputes with a neutral third party instead of in a messy court battle.
This quote just perfectly captures the level of detail we're talking about. You can't just say there are risks. For therapies where the experience is so subjective, you have to be explicit about the entire range of possible outcomes: the good, the bad, and the intensely transformative. That transparency is absolutely crucial for managing patient expectations and for demonstrating you acted responsibly.
And it doesn't just stop at consent. You need meticulous documentation that tracks outcomes, even for something as subjective as energy work. Use standardized scales for anxiety or pain before and after. That data is going to be vital for future insurance negotiations. Be crystal clear in your billing. Never, ever try to disguise a session under a conventional code. That's a huge red flag. And for now, honestly, the safest route might be to keep these services entirely cash pay, creating a clean firewall against all those insurance-related risks.
So, what does all this really mean for your practice? Look, this isn't a passing fad. The integration of these therapies is the next evolution in healthcare, and preparing for it now is the absolute key to both your survival and your success.
All right, here is your action plan, your homework. Start using those new CBT codes for internal data tracking today. Go back and audit your consent forms tomorrow. And please, don't do this alone. Consult with experts. When you talk to a lawyer, ask them specifically about vicarious liability, especially if you plan to have non-licensed practitioners in your clinic. When you talk to your insurance broker, ask about a separate errors and omissions policy. And finally, standardize your documentation now so you're audit-proof later.
And I'll just leave you with this one final thought. This change, it's already happening. Your patients are out there right now spending billions of dollars actively seeking these treatments. The question is no longer whether this is part of healthcare's future. The only question is, will your clinic be prepared to lead the way, or will it be left behind?